everybody in advance that we may have to take a little break at some point because there may be two votes, but after that break we will resume. So I just wanted to begin by giving everybody the heads up on that. And I want to wish everybody good morning, and I want to thank you for attending this very important hearing on the current human rights situation in Tibet. I would like to give special thanks to Colleen Costello and Mike McVicker and all the people who are on the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission for coordinating this hearing, and I look forward to hearing the testimony. In 1987, the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, which was the predecessor to the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, was the first U.S. government body to extend a formal invitation to the Dalai Lama to address the issues of repression in Tibet. My friend Catherine Porter remembers that because she was very much involved in that in those early days. The caucus and the commission went on to hold many more events on the subject of human rights in Tibet. We are pleased to continue that tradition by welcoming Dr. Lobsang Sangai, the freely elected Khalon Tripa, and new leading political figure of the Tibetan government in exile. Despite overwhelming support from the United Nations and the international community for human rights protections for Tibetans, I regret to say that the Chinese government continues to deny these rights to Tibetans. For the past 60 years, Tibetans have faced constant religious, political, and cultural repression, only varying in degree of severity. Since 1995, the Chinese government has attempted to mitigate the influence of the Dalai Lama by passing laws and edicts that interfere with the Tibetan Buddhist tradition of recognizing the reincarnations of high-ranking religious figures. In recent years, the repression and religious interference has intensified considerably. A report issued by the UN Committee Against Torture in December of 2008 noted that there have been, quote, long-standing reports of torture, beatings, shackling, and other abusive treatment, in particular of Tibetan monks and nuns, at the hands of public officials, public security, and security, as well as paramilitary personnel. These abuses continue today. This situation is now so dire that Tibetan Buddhist clergy have begun committing self-immolations, a form of protest virtually unheard of in Tibet until recently. Self-immolations have become more frequent with the past year. Since March, at least 9 monks and 2 nuns have set themselves on fire in protest of Chinese policies restricting their religious and cultural freedoms. 6 of these immolations took place in October alone, a clear sign that China's repressive practices are driving Tibetans to a point of desperation. Rather than recognizing that such a desperate and extreme form of protest requires dialogue and reconciliation, the Chinese government has instead increased the level of repression placed on Tibetan monks, leading to unlawful detention, abuse, torture, enforced disappearances, patriotic re-education, and possible killings. Not surprisingly, the Chinese government has attempted to restrict the flow of information out of Tibet to prevent word about its actions from spreading. Among other things, China has detained dozens of writers, intellectuals, bloggers, and other individuals for expressing their views or sharing information about the crackdown on Tibet. Despite tactics to suppress the flow of information, reports of China's repression still manage to make their way out of Tibet. Pertinent to today's hearing, in at least one well-known instance, 300 monks were taken away from Kirti Monastery in April. Not long after the monks were removed from the monastery for, quote, political re-education, Chinese officials declared that hundreds of monks from the monastery were to be expelled. Many of the monks who underwent, quote, re-education were reportedly among those prohibited from returning to Kirti Monastery. Tibetans who attempt to flee to India or Nepal to escape this repressive environment in China often face significant challenges. Many of the refugee settlements that the Tibetans flee to are overcrowded and in dire need of modernization. At the same time, Tibetan refugees in India and Nepal often lack the same rights and privileges as other refugees in those countries. This is particularly true in Nepal, where Tibetan refugees are not granted refugee status and therefore exist as stateless persons. These problems, coupled with China's increasing influence in South Asia, have led refugees to face the very real threat of deportation back to Tibet, where they face persecution or worse. Today, we look forward to hearing from Dr. Lobsang Sangai, Khalon Tripa of the Central Tibetan Administration, who will describe the current human rights situation in Tibet. We will also receive testimony from His Eminence Kirti Rinpoche, the spiritual leader of the Kirti monasteries in Tibet and in India, who will discuss the recent repressions by the Chinese government and consequent self-immolations at Kirti Monastery in Tibet. Again, on behalf of the Commission, I want to thank both of our witnesses for being here. Prime Minister Lob Sangai, it is a real honor to have you here, and I look forward to your testimony, and the floor is now yours. Thank you.